One of the things I love most in life is seeing someone's eyes light up when they speak about something close to their heart. That life force is easiest to see in young children, I think, but certainly present in adults as well. I remember once while traveling, I was walking down a rural path, going at that measured pace that having a camera allows. There was a woman sitting on her front doorstep with a little boy in her lap, probably 3 or so. He was sucking his thumb and looking about as relaxed as a body can. I stopped, undoubtedly smiling at them, and holding my camera, I asked in gesture if I could take their picture. But the boy was way ahead of me. From totally inert, this little boy rocketed out of his mother's arms, flinging his arms out wide, going, "Yay!" To the world at large, it still makes me laugh. And recently, when I was back at my house in San Diego, my little neighbor girl reminded me of that same joyful energy. At 4 or 5 years old, she used to peek around the bushes between her house and mine, and if I was in the garden, she'd grin and then just run at me full out, leaping into my arms, almost bowling me over every time. That unself-conscious love of life, it's that precious gift I wish we could all share no matter what our age. A while back, a friend of mine gave me a book called The Great Work of Your Life. It's written by Stephen Cope, the director of the largest yoga research institute in the Western world. The book is about the challenge, even the necessity, of finding and living your own life full out. The book is grounded in the ancient Hindu yoga tradition, which is also part of my spiritual practice. And the language is about finding your dharma, a word that is layered and complex. We'll simply call it the search for one's life path, the vocation, almost duty, that is particularly yours to live. What's lovely about this book is that it's full of stories of people whose names you will know, and also stories of, quote, ordinary folks you'll never heard of. Cope is quick to say that he doesn't really see the difference between the two. It's just some of the more famous folks got extra good starts on the path to personal dharma. The so-called success stories are helpful in their illumination of the conditions that seem to support the adult expression of a life lived full out. One story that stuck with me was from the life of Jane Goodall, in particular, a moment when she was 4 years old. As you undoubtedly know, Goodall is famous for her decades of work observing the behavior of chimpanzees. Her long and creative career has been well celebrated, but what's important here is how she came to find and develop this impassioned work and life. It's about the way she was helped to find her own gifts early on. Cope tells us the key to her success right off. As a child, he says, her gifts were named. They were celebrated, they were cherished, and they were nurtured over time. As a very young child, Jane was apparently interested in animals and the natural world. At 4 years of age, living on the family farm in the English countryside, Jane became fascinated with the chickens, and specifically how they managed to lay those eggs. Being only 4 and small, Jane decided to join the chickens in their coop and watch. What she didn't account for on the first try was that the chickens might not have been prepared for her arrival. As she crawled into the coop after these egg-laying birds, she was met with squawking and flying feathers and quickly departing chickens. Wisely, young Jane decided that a different tack might be wise on the second attempt. This time she reasoned she should lie in wait for the chickens so as not to disturb them so abruptly again. She crawled inside when the chickens were gone and hid her 4-year-old self in the hay in the back corner of the cage. Apparently, she waited for hours. This seems all but impossible to me for someone at 4, but nevertheless she did. Perhaps a forerunner of her later professional style. Her family, meanwhile, had noticed her absence and had started a search for her all over the farm. Oblivious to parental concern, Jane held her still and silent place and was eventually rewarded by the arrival of a chicken, which promptly sat down right next to her. With Jane watching carefully, the chicken settled herself, then rose ever so slightly to deliver a brand new egg right before Jane's, I imagine, astonished eyes. While all this slow motion drama was taking place, Jane's parents had become frantic. They'd been missing their daughter for several hours now and had searched all the hideouts they could possibly imagine. They'd scoured the farm and were on the edge of panic when Jane burst from the chicken coop, all smiles and shining eyes, obviously intent on telling her story to her otherwise traumatized parents. It's the reaction of Jane's mother here that's important. Rather than spewing out her fear or meting out punishment on her missing child, Jane's mother caught the joy in her daughter's face, the shine in her eyes, and she sat down and listened as Jane told every detail of her adventure. In that split second between fear and recognition, Jane's mother made all the difference. And this different responsiveness carried over the years. Much later, when Jane was adult and was headed to Tanzania to do her research, her mother was still there supporting her in a myriad of ways. Cope summarizes this extraordinary gift that Jane received from her mother. He notes that Jane's interest and passion were named for her before she was able to do that for herself. Her passion was celebrated. It was also cherished, and it was nurtured over time. As a consequence, Jane's life energy, her passion, was channeled largely unobstructed into a life of creative work and into a lifelong commitment that we can all recognize as a gift to the world. I don't know the full details of Jane Goodall's development, but I'm sure every moment wasn't rosy. The point is, though, that the early recognition of her gifts allowed Jane to trust herself and trust her own love. That nourishment allowed a flourishing of the light in her life. Those shining childhood eyes became an adult passion, a life path, a life lived to its fullest. Cope is quick to point out that while this is a beautiful story of gifts both seen and cherished, these conditions are the exception, not the rule. Most of us don't find such welcoming responses to our beginning loves. More likely, we may have been pressed to be what our parents wanted, or perhaps what our culture seemed to demand. We may have been hurt or rejected for following our hearts, or maybe we were simply missed by parents too rushed or busy. Maybe we had no parents at all. And if we belonged to a marginalized community, we may have been actively ignored in this culture, left feeling both devalued and unseen. The less than perfect conditions in which we all have lived bend and shape us in as many ways as there are human beings. And as a result, the light that is our lives can be hidden, under any number of protective layers. When that is the case, it takes great courage to recognize our passions for ourselves and then to risk offering those gifts out in the world. That courage may strain mightily against our desire for safety and protection. This, I imagine, is something we've all experienced at one point in our lives. Stephen Cope actually begins his book acknowledging these challenges. In his introduction, his very first words are, "What do you fear most in this life?" He answers for himself. He says, "I'm afraid that I'll die without having lived fully. Okay, I'm also afraid of pain and dying a difficult death, but that's later. Mostly right now, I'm afraid that I may be missing some magnificent possibility, that perhaps I've not risked enough to find it, that maybe I've lived too safe a life." He follows his confession with the words of Thomas Merton, who also pairs the idea of risk with that of living fully. Merton says, "What you fear is an indication of what you seek." And later, Cope adds this stunning quote from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, words that brought Cope up short. It reads, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Yikes. Cope repeats that sentence for himself over and over again. How can not expressing yourself destroy you? What precisely is destroyed in too safe a life? He comes to explain the loss like this. He says, energy is destroyed first, those shining eyes, and then faith, and then hope, and then life itself. Cope suggests that without the balm of real fulfillment, there's a growing emptiness inside. Finally, it requires an heroic effort to simply go on with life in the face of this emptiness. The light in those eyes goes out. That danger is one we all need to watch for in ourselves, in our children, in our companions in this life. Cope's naming of this danger gives us warning signs for our lives, but his message is clearly about resilience and hope. Our gifts, he says, are too close to the core of our being to ever be fully destroyed, no matter how challenging our lives. That's the good news, even the great news. Our life passions are strong, and despite the challenges, they persist. In some ways, they won't leave us alone. In my previous life as a psychologist and clinician, I saw so many examples of this resilience in life, this urgent need to fight against forces that try to keep us down. I was reminded of that resilience last year when I heard from a young woman I had known 2 decades ago. She had been in the custody of the court for most of her young life. At the age of 7, after her parents had abused and then abandoned her, she was shuffled from one foster home to another. In her desperation, she told me, she had clung to the words of those few people who had had faith in her, those who had named her strength and valued her life. They were the tiny islands of care and recognition that made a path out of her despair. Now a college graduate headed for law school, she was claiming a life of meaning and purpose that was clearly close to her heart. Whatever our age, whatever the barriers, underneath there's always a forward press, an energy of life waiting for us to find and claim it. As Parker Palmer says, we all arrive in this world with gifts and as a gift. We start with our own sacred souls and with our own pearls of great price. They do not go away. Perhaps for you it's your work, or maybe it's the books you consume late at night. Maybe it's the dinners you love to offer your friends, or the flowers you tend, or the shapes you mold out of clay. Maybe it's the evening classes you offer at the community college, or the polishing of that beautiful jalopy in your backyard. Maybe it's the music you make in the garage, or the jokes you love to tell. Maybe it's the magic tricks that make the children laugh. Whatever they are, cherish and nurture these little pieces of joy in your life. They may well be the stepping stones to your passion and your life lived full out. It turns out, Cope says, that most folks are actually living very close to their Dharma. It's just that they don't quite notice. They may talk about their work, but skip over the joy they feel when they're back home cooking. Maybe they forget to tell you that they write poetry every night. They don't name their gifts. They don't own them, and they don't live them with intention. Their own light is hiding in plain sight, he says. I wonder if this might be true for some of us. In a community of caring others such as ours, it would seem to me that seeing and supporting each other's gifts and passions could be a common practice. In this sacred work of truly living fully, I leave you with the words of Howard Thurman, who said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because the world needs, what the world needs is more people who have come alive." May it be so.